The story begins with a silence so heavy it seems to weigh on the entire block. On Maple Street, in a quiet Pennsylvania town, an old house stands alone, swallowed by ivy and memories. For 70 years, its doors have remained closed, its windows covered in boards weathered by rain, snow, and sun. People walk past it with hurried steps, as if the very sight carries a reminder of something best forgotten. Yet one autumn morning, 3 men gather at its gate, unaware that crossing the threshold will change them in ways they could never imagine. Before we move further, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Powerful, emotional journeys that stay with you long after they're told. Ethan Carter, 34 years old, runs his own small contracting company. His hands are rough from years of construction work, but the weight on his shoulders isn't from tools, it's from debt and uncertainty. Jobs are scarce, clients pay late, and the thought of closing his business has been gnawing at him. When the offer came to clear out this old property, he couldn't refuse. Beside him stands Marcus Hill, 38, Ethan's childhood friend. Where Ethan is driven, Marcus is cautious. His deep voice often carries doubt, a reminder of the risks that Ethan prefers to overlook. Marcus works steady shifts at a warehouse, but he's here to help, more out of loyalty to Ethan than belief in the project. And then there's Daniel Brooks, the youngest at 29, a friend they both met years back on smaller jobs. Daniel has a curious mind, always drawn to history and the stories that objects can tell. While the others see broken floorboards and mold, he sees fragments of lives lived and questions waiting to be answered. The house before them is more than a job. Its cracked walls, sagging roof, and silence seem to hold a challenge. Locals whisper that nothing good will come from opening it again. Mrs. Langford, the elderly neighbor across the street, once muttered, "Some doors are closed for a reason." But Ethan brushed it off. He needs the money. "Man, this place looks like it's about to collapse," Marcus says, eyeing the broken shutters. Daniel, adjusting his glasses, replies softly, "It's a time capsule." 70 years, Mike, imagine what's inside. Ethan runs a hand over the rusted gate, the name Carter faintly visible on a mailbox eaten by rust. It stirs something in him, though he quickly pushes the thought aside. Let's get this done. The faster we start, the faster we finish. The morning air carries a sharp chill. Fallen leaves crunch beneath their boots as they step onto the overgrown path. Weeds wrap around stone steps that lead to the door, and vines crawl across the siding like veins on old skin. Ethan pulls out the heavy iron key given by the property manager, and for a moment, none of them move. The house looms before them, patient and unmoving, as though waiting for this exact moment. Marcus mutters, "You sure about this, Ethan? Some jobs aren't worth it." Ethan forces a smile. "It's just another house, Marcus. Wood, nails, dust, that's all." But Daniel shakes his head slowly. "No, this isn't just another house. It's a story buried under 7 decades. Their hands tremble slightly as Ethan pushes the key into the lock. It grinds, stiff from years of rust and disuse, until with a final twist it clicks. The door creaks open, releasing a breath of stale air that smells of rot and forgotten lives. All 3 men exchange glances. None of them speak, but each feels it, the sense that what lies ahead will not be simple. As the dim hallway stretches before them, heavy with dust and silence, one thought presses into Ethan's mind, echoing louder than the creak of the floorboards beneath his boots. Some doors change everything once opened, and with that, they step inside. The moment their boots touched the dusty wooden floor, the air seemed to shift. Inside, the silence was so complete it pressed against their ears. Each breath stirred motes of dust that floated in the slivers of light sneaking through gaps in the boarded windows. The house hadn't welcomed visitors in 70 years, and it made no effort to hide that fact. Behind them, Maple Street stretched out in familiar quiet. The neighborhood was a mix of neatly trimmed lawns, children's bicycles tipped on driveways, and mailboxes freshly painted. Yet this house broke the harmony like a scar on smooth skin. Its lawn was an untamed jungle of weeds and ivy, its siding peeling away, its windows gaping like blinded eyes. Neighbors avoided it, glancing away as if its shadow might cling to them. Mrs. Langford, the elderly woman across the street, peered through her curtains with sharp eyes. She had lived there her entire life, and whispers about the old Carter place had outlasted generations. She once told Marcus years back, "That house holds more sorrow than wood." And now, watching the three men step inside, she shook her head as if she already knew trouble would follow. Inside, the men took their first cautious steps into the entryway. The smell of mildew was thick, mixed with something older like forgotten fabric and rust. Wallpaper peeled in long strips, showing faded plaster beneath. A broken chandelier hung crookedly above them, its crystals clouded with grime. "Place smells like a tomb," Marcus muttered, covering his nose with his sleeve. Ethan ignored the comment, though his throat tightened at the stench. He forced himself to focus on the practical. The floorboards groaned under his weight, but they held. The job was dangerous, yes, but manageable. "We'll clear it out section by section," he said firmly. "One room at a time. Just like any other job." Daniel's gaze lingered on the details, an umbrella stand still holding two umbrellas, shoes lined up by the door, as if waiting for owners who never returned. "It's like someone locked the door and just walked away," he whispered. They moved deeper into the living room, where furniture sat frozen in dust. A floral sofa slumped under its own weight, cushions torn by moths. A rotary phone rested on a side table, its cord twisted into knots. Bookshelves lined one wall, their spines swollen from dampness, titles barely legible. Marcus shook his head. "All this should have been torn down decades ago. Nothing but a hazard." "Not everything here is trash," Daniel replied sharply, kneeling to examine a framed photograph lying face down on the carpet. He wiped it clean with his sleeve, revealing a smiling couple dressed in 1940s clothing. The edges of the photo were yellowed, but the warmth in their faces survived time. These people lived here. This meant something to them. Ethan glanced at the photo, then looked away quickly. The surname on the back, Carter, made his chest tighten, though he said nothing. He forced his attention toward the work. "Let's check the dining room," he said, trying to sound brisk. The dining room carried an even heavier air. A long wooden table sat in the center, covered in a thick blanket of dust. Plates, cups, and silverware remained neatly set as if dinner had been abandoned in an instant. Cobwebs stretched across chairs, and a single candlestick stood melted into nothing but hardened wax. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, 70 years and it's still waiting." Marcus rubbed his arms against the chill. "I don't like it. Feels wrong." Ethan pushed on, his tone sharper than before. "It's just a house. Don't get lost in stories. We're here to finish a job, nothing more." But deep down, even Ethan couldn't shake the unease. The house felt alive in its silence, watching, weighing them. Each creak of the floor seemed deliberate, every shadow heavier than it should be. The walls weren't just walls. They carried the echo of a family that once filled them with voices, laughter, and arguments. Now they held only emptiness. Daniel lingered near the dining table, his hand brushing against a stack of yellowed newspapers. He pulled one free, squinting at the headline, July 12th, 1955. He swallowed hard, then showed it to Ethan. "This isn't just a mess to clear. This is history sealed away." Marcus groaned. "History doesn't pay bills, Daniel. Clearing it out does." "Don't start romanticizing this place." But Ethan stayed silent. He was torn between Marcus's pragmatism and Daniel's reverence. The house had already begun to whisper to him in ways he couldn't explain, and though he tried to hide it, a question started to take root in his mind. Why had no one ever come back? As the men moved deeper into the hushed rooms, their unease thickened. The Carter house was more than dust and decay. It was a place where time had frozen, and the silence demanded answers none of them were ready to face. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel carved out of dust and silence. Each step the men took stirred clouds that hung in the air, glittering faintly in the dim light. The atmosphere was suffocating, a mix of mold, old wood, and something faintly metallic. It clung to their clothes, their skin, their throats. Ethan took the lead, flashlight in hand. The beam cut across faded wallpaper, once patterned with vines and flowers, but now peeling in strips, curling at the edges like brittle leaves. "All right," he said, his voice steady though his chest felt tight. We'll start with the front rooms, work our way back. Keep it systematic. Marcus walked close behind, his boots thudding heavily on the warped floorboards. He looked around with sharp eyes, already cataloguing hazards. Systematic or not, this place is a death trap. Floor's soft, ceiling looks ready to cave, and I don't even want to think about what's in the air we're breathing. He tugged his jacket collar up, muttering, "Should have brought masks." Daniel lingered at the rear, his gaze catching on details the others overlooked. A child's toy soldier wedged beneath a radiator, a half-burned candle stuck to the windowsill, curtains eaten away but still swaying. Faintly as if stirred by breath. "It's like time stopped," he whispered, almost reverently. They stepped into what had once been a sitting room. Dust-coated furniture sagged beneath decades of neglect. A record player sat in the corner, its needle frozen mid-song, while stacks of vinyl records leaned against it like toppled dominoes. Shelves bowed under the weight of books swollen with moisture, their spines unreadable. Ethan surveyed the room and shook his head. "We'll need gloves, masks, and probably a dumpster outside. Half of this isn't salvageable." Marcus grunted in agreement. "Whole place should be bulldozed." But Daniel crouched near a coffee table, brushing dust from a stack of magazines. The top one bore the bold headline, Life magazine, August 1953. The cover showed a smiling family in black and white. The ink faded but still clear. "Not everything here is worthless," he said quietly. "These are snapshots of another world." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Snapshots don't put food on the table, Daniel." Ethan's patience thinned. He rubbed his temples, speaking firmly. "Enough, we've all got our reasons for being here. Let's just focus on the job." But even as he spoke, his eyes drifted toward a framed picture on the wall. A man in a suit, standing proudly beside a woman in a floral dress. Their faces smiled warmly, yet the frame was coated in grime. The glass cracked. Something about the man's sharp features and steady gaze stirred an odd familiarity in Ethan, though he quickly looked away. As they moved toward the dining room, the house pushed back against them. Rotten floorboards sagged under their weight, groaning dangerously. In one spot, Marcus's boot sank through splintering wood. He cursed, yanking his leg free, his ankle narrowly avoiding serious harm. "See, death trap," he snapped, glaring at Ethan. Ethan forced calm into his voice. "We'll tread carefully. Just watch your steps. We've handled worse." But inside, his confidence faltered. He knew Marcus was right. The house was unstable, yet he couldn't turn back, not with so much riding on this job. Daniel's flashlight swept across the kitchen doorway, where a refrigerator from another era stood silent, its chrome dulled with rust. The air grew colder there, the smell sharper. He hesitated, sensing a weight in the room beyond, but said nothing. They pressed on, their progress slow, deliberate. Every corner revealed another relic of lives paused mid-motion. Coats still hanging by the door, a clock frozen at 4:17, newspapers stacked in neat piles. The deeper they moved, the more it felt as though the house wasn't abandoned at all. It was waiting. Marcus broke the silence with a low voice. "Why would anyone just leave all this behind? Clothes, dishes, furniture, it doesn't make sense." Daniel, brushing dust from another framed photo, murmured, "That's the question, isn't it?" Ethan didn't answer. His mind was busy with practicalities, with the tension between what he saw as a contractor and what he felt as a man. Every detail, every creak, made him feel caught between duty and unease. The house wasn't just a shell of wood and nails, it was a keeper of secrets, pressing in on them with every step. And though they didn't know it yet, the first glimpse inside was only the beginning. The men moved deeper into the house, each room pulling them further into a maze of dust and silence. What began as curiosity now pressed on their shoulders like weight, making every step slower, every glance sharper. The sitting room had already unsettled them, but it was the smaller spaces, the hidden corners, that carried the most unnerving power. They entered a narrow hallway lined with faded family portraits. Faces stared back from the walls, frozen in sepia tones, smiles faint and distant. Children in Sunday clothes, a young couple at a picnic, a stern man with a military haircut. The photographs seemed alive, not haunting, but filled with a presence that made Daniel pause. He ran his fingers lightly across one cracked frame. They lived. They loved. All of it's still here, he whispered. Marcus shook his head, uncomfortable. All I see are walls that could come down on us any second. Don't get sentimental, Daniel. Ethan tried to stay focused on the task. He examined the plaster, tested the floorboards with careful steps. But despite his contractor's eye, he couldn't shake the feeling that the house resisted their intrusion. His voice came out tight. Let's keep moving. The faster we clear it, the sooner we're out. The next room was a bedroom, its curtains moth-eaten, its bed still made with yellowing sheets. A vanity sat in the corner, glass cracked, bottles of perfume evaporated to crust. Daniel leaned closer, fascinated by the little details. A hairbrush with strands still tangled in it, a jewelry box half open with imitation pearls inside. It's like they meant to come back, he murmured. Marcus frowned. Or they didn't care enough to take junk with them. Daniel shot him a look. This isn't junk. These are pieces of people's lives. Ethan cut in before the argument could build. We're not here to debate what matters. We're here to clear the place. Take note of anything valuable, but don't lose time. His words were practical, yet even he felt something when his flashlight beam caught a small notebook on the vanity. He resisted the urge to open it. Not yet. The men continued, weaving through tight spaces choked with furniture, boxes, and relics of a life abandoned. In a hallway closet, they found coats hanging neatly on wooden hangers, hats stacked on the shelf above. The smell of mothballs clung to the fabric. Marcus shoved the door closed quickly, muttering, "Creeps me out." Like someone could just slip one on and walk out the door. Daniel, meanwhile, carefully pulled open drawers of a cabinet, revealing stacks of letters tied with ribbon, their ink faded but intact. He held one gently, as though it might crumble in his hands. His voice was soft. "Do you realize what this is?" Real voices from 70 years ago. Ethan sighed, though his own chest stirred with the same unease Daniel felt. "Put them aside. We'll sort later." The farther they went, the more the atmosphere thickened. Shadows stretched long in the corners, swallowing the weak glow of their flashlights. The air smelled heavier, a mix of mildew and something metallic. Each man felt it differently. Marcus with suspicion, Daniel with wonder, Ethan with a conflicted silence he couldn't shake. Then they found a locked door at the end of a corridor. It was sturdy, with a rusted chain looped across the handle. Dust coated the surface, but faint scratches marked the wood, as though someone had once tried to force it open. Marcus scowled. "That's where we stop." "I'm not touching that." Daniel stepped closer, eyes wide. "A locked room in a sealed house, that's where the story is." Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel both men's stares pressing on him, demanding a choice. The key in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. Though he knew it wouldn't fit this door, he didn't move, not yet. The house itself seemed to wait, silent and patient, daring them to try. The locked door loomed at the end of the narrow hallway, its chain rusted but firm, its handle dulled by time. The silence around it felt heavier, as though the rest of the house was holding its breath. Ethan, Marcus, and Daniel stood before it, each man carrying his own unspoken thoughts. Marcus was the first to break the silence. His voice was low, edged with irritation. "We're not messing with that. Place is bad enough without forcing open something someone clearly wanted shut." He crossed his arms, shifting his weight onto his good leg, though the floor creaked threateningly beneath him. Daniel, his flashlight beam tracing the scratches etched into the wood, shook his head. "A locked room in a house sealed for 70 years? Don't you see what this means?" "This could explain everything. Why the family left, why no one came back. You can't just walk away from this." Ethan stared at the chain, jaw tight. He felt both arguments tugging at him. Marcus spoke from caution, the voice of reason sharpened by fear. Daniel spoke from curiosity, from the hunger to uncover truth. And Ethan, he felt caught between them, weighed down by the sense that his choice here would matter more than just for this job. "I'm telling you, nothing good's behind that door," Marcus pressed on. "Could be black mold, could be rats, could be worse. Not worth it. We've got enough on our plates." Daniel turned sharply, frustration flaring in his voice. "You always want the easy way out, Marcus. Don't you ever wonder, Don't you ever think there's more to life than just scraping by and walking away? Marcus's glare hardened. And you always want to dig where you shouldn't. Curiosity like yours gets people hurt. The tension in the hallway was thick. Ethan finally raised his hand, cutting them both off. His tone was steady, but inside, his chest tightened with doubt. Enough. We're not here to argue. We're here to do a job, but this door isn't like the others. His eyes lingered on the faint marks around the handle, the way the chain had been looped not once but twice. Someone didn't want it opened. That makes me wonder why. For a moment all three stood in silence, listening to the faint groans of the house around them. The wind outside rattled the boarded windows, a hollow echo through the walls. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. What if there's something worth saving inside? Letters? Records? Something that tells us who they were? You can feel it, can't you? This isn't just junk behind that door. Marcus shook his head stubbornly, his voice rising. And what if it's dangerous? You think anyone chains a door shut because they've got good memories locked away? No, Daniel. People shut things off for a reason. Ethan felt the weight of both their stares pressing into him. He rubbed the back of his neck, sweat cold despite the chill in the air. The truth was he didn't know which way to lean. A part of him wanted to side with Marcus, to finish the job quickly, take the money and walk away. But another part of him, the part that had stared too long at the family portraits and the carefully set dining table, couldn't ignore Daniel's conviction. The house wasn't empty. It was speaking, and the locked room felt like its loudest voice. Finally, Ethan exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. We'll open it. Marcus threw his hands in the air. Of course you'd say that. Ethan turned to him, his voice calm but firm. If we leave it shut, we'll always wonder, and I don't want that hanging over me. We'll do it carefully. If it looks unsafe, we stop, but we open it. Daniel's face lit with quiet triumph, though he said nothing, respecting the weight of Ethan's decision. Marcus muttered under his breath, but he didn't turn away. Loyalty bound him to Ethan even when his gut screamed otherwise. Ethan stepped forward, gripping the chain with both hands. The metal was cold, brittle with rust. He pulled once, testing its strength. It held. He pulled harder, the links grinding, resisting. With a final wrench, the chain snapped, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed far too loud in the silence. The door creaked, shifting slightly on its hinges. The air that seeped out was colder, heavier, as though untouched for decades. Ethan's pulse quickened. Marcus cursed under his breath, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The door stood half open now, waiting. What lay beyond it would not be forgotten. The chain lay broken on the floor, its metallic clatter still echoing in their ears. Ethan pushed the door open wider, and a rush of stale, cold air drifted past them. A staircase descended steeply into the darkness. Wooden steps bowed with age. The smell was sharper here, mildew, dust, and something earthy, like damp soil sealed for decades. Marcus stepped back immediately, shaking his head. No way, I'm not going down there. This is where bad things happen, Ethan. Basements like this, they're nothing but trouble. Daniel's eyes, however, gleamed with an unsettling mix of fear and wonder. He lifted his flashlight, pointing the beam down the narrow stairwell. The light cut across cobwebs and revealed shelves stacked with indistinct shapes. It's not trouble, he said softly. It's history. Look, boxes, storage. They didn't chain this up for rats. Ethan stood still, torn between their voices. His stomach knotted at the thought of stepping into the unknown, but he couldn't ignore the possibility of what lay below. His company's future balanced on jobs like this. Yet deep inside he felt something heavier, a pull he couldn't explain, as if the name Carter carved into the rusted mailbox outside was still echoing in his blood. He tightened his grip on the flashlight. We're going down, he said firmly, though his voice betrayed a flicker of unease. Marcus swore under his breath but followed anyway, unwilling to let Ethan go alone. Daniel moved quickly, his eagerness barely restrained. The three descended, each step groaning beneath their weight, the wood soft with age. At the bottom, their lights revealed a basement unlike anything they had expected. Instead of debris or rot, rows of shelves filled the space, lined with neatly arranged boxes, trunks, and crates. Dust coated everything, Yet the organization was clear. Whoever left these items had done so carefully, deliberately, as if intending to preserve them. Daniel's breath caught. This isn't just storage. It's an archive. Marcus scanned the room, his unease growing. Or it's junk someone couldn't be bothered to throw away. Don't make it into something it's not. But Ethan stepped forward, brushing his hand across a wooden crate. His fingers left trails in the thick dust. On the side of the box, faint writing showed through. Carter family, 1947. His chest tightened as though a rope had drawn around his ribs. He couldn't ignore the coincidence any longer. He opened the box carefully. Inside lay neatly stacked journals, their leather covers cracked but intact. Alongside them were bundles of letters tied with twine, their envelopes yellowed with age. In another box nearby, Daniel uncovered photo albums, their covers brittle but their pages still holding faces frozen in time. Families smiling at picnics, children on swings, holiday gatherings around decorated trees. Daniel whispered as he turned the pages. They wanted this remembered. They didn't abandon it. They preserved it. Marcus shifted uneasily, his voice rough. Then why chain it shut? Why hide it? Doesn't add up. Ethan crouched near one of the journals, carefully lifting it from the box. The cover bore the initials RC. He flipped it open, revealing neat handwriting in blue ink. The words spoke of simple days, weather reports, errands, notes about planting a garden. But as Ethan read, the name Richard Carter appeared again and again. The man in the photographs upstairs, the man whose smile had seemed strangely familiar, had left his voice behind in these pages. A strange pressure filled Ethan's chest. He didn't know if it was coincidence or something more, but the name carved outside, the portraits on the wall, the journals in his hand, they felt connected to him in ways he couldn't yet define. Daniel leaned over his shoulder, whispering, "You see it too, don't you? This isn't random. These stories wanted to be found." Marcus groaned, rubbing his face. "Or maybe they wanted to be buried, and we just unleashed something we'll regret. Ever think of that?" Ethan didn't answer. His eyes lingered on Richard Carter's words, steady handwriting that bridged 70 years of silence. The basement wasn't just storage, it was testimony. And Ethan realized with a shiver that their job had shifted into something far greater than cleaning a forgotten house. The silence of the basement seemed deeper than before, as if waiting for them to turn the next page. The basement's quiet lingered long after they had unearthed the first boxes. Dust clung to their hair and clothes, and the smell of mildew seeped into their lungs, burning with each breath. Hours slipped away unnoticed as they pulled out journals, letters and photographs, stacking them carefully on an old workbench. But the deeper they went, the heavier the air became, not only with dust, but with tension among them. Marcus leaned against the wall, his ankle throbbing from where he had stepped through the floor earlier. He rubbed it with a wince, muttering, "This is exactly what I warned about. Dangerous floors, rotten air, we're pushing our luck." Ethan shot him a glance, trying to steady his voice. "You're hurt, yeah, but we'll manage. Once we're done down here, we can call it for the day." Daniel didn't even look up from the letters he was carefully untying. His eyes were alight, scanning words that had waited 7 decades to be read. "We can't stop now. Do you realize what this is? Personal accounts, entire lives preserved. This isn't junk, it's living memory." Marcus let out a sharp laugh that echoed harshly in the basement. "Living memory? It's moldy paper." "It doesn't change the fact that my ankle's swelling and we're choking on this air." Ethan stepped between them, voice firm. "Enough. We're all tired, we're all breathing the same air, but walking away halfway isn't an option. Not for me." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "That's your problem, Ethan. You think pushing forward solves everything." "You're not listening to reason." The words hit Ethan harder than he expected. He clenched his jaw, feeling the old weight of financial stress pressing down on him. Every job mattered, and failure wasn't a luxury he could afford. But deep inside, he also knew Marcus wasn't wrong. The mold clung to his lungs with every inhale, and his friend's injury could worsen if they weren't careful. Daniel interrupted softly, holding up a journal with trembling hands. "Listen to this." His voice steadied as he read aloud from Richard Carter's entries. The house feels heavier these days. Eleanor says it's just the season, but I know it's more. Money's tight and every corner seems to carry the weight of choices I can't make. The words sank into the silence. Ethan swallowed hard. He could almost feel Richard Carter's exhaustion mirroring his own, struggling to hold on, forced to face responsibilities that never eased. He whispered without meaning to, "I know that feeling." Marcus caught it and frowned. "You're starting to take this too personally. Don't start mixing your problems with theirs." But Ethan didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the journal, the handwriting so steady and deliberate, as though Richard Carter had written not only for himself, but for someone in the future to find. The silence between the three men grew sharper, filled with unspoken doubts. Marcus worried about safety, Daniel about preserving history, and Ethan about both, but also about himself, his failures, his name etched in rust outside on the mailbox as if mocking him. Finally, Marcus pushed away from the wall, limping toward the stairs. "I need air. My ankle's killing me, and I'm not breaking my neck for some old letters." Daniel bristled, defensive. "Then go." "No one's forcing you to care." Marcus spun back, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think this is about not caring? It's about survival. Some of us don't have the luxury of chasing stories." The words landed hard. Daniel turned away, clutching the journal tighter, his face pale in the dim light. Ethan closed the book in his hands and exhaled slowly. The cracks between them were widening, and the house with its silence and shadows seemed to feed on the tension. Above them, a loud creak echoed through the floorboards, reminding them of the unstable shell they stood inside. Dust rained from the ceiling. The house itself seemed to whisper a warning. Not everything should be uncovered. Ethan looked at his friends, one limping, one trembling with conviction, and felt the weight of choice pressing heavier than ever. When Marcus finally settled upstairs to ease his swollen ankle, Ethan and Daniel remained in the basement, surrounded by stacks of journals and photo albums. The silence felt different now, less like resistance, more like invitation. Dust floated lazily in the beams of their flashlights, as though the air itself wanted the words to be read. Daniel opened another album with careful fingers. Black and white photographs filled the pages. Children in overalls, women in floral dresses, men in work shirts with sleeves rolled high. He traced the edges of one picture, a family picnic in a grassy field. The children grinned around a checkered blanket, while a man, tall and proud, rested a hand on his wife's shoulder. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, read, "Summer, 1949. Richard and Eleanor with the kids." Daniel's voice softened. They weren't just faces on a wall. They had lives, joy, struggles, everything. Look at them. This is what they wanted remembered. Ethan leaned closer, his throat tightening at the names. Richard Carter, Eleanor Carter. The echo of his own surname felt heavier with each page. They look normal, like any other family. Daniel nodded, flipping carefully to the next set of photos. That's what makes it powerful. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, and now forgotten. Until us. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes landed on a journal resting on the workbench. He opened it, pages filled with Richard's steady handwriting. One entry described Eleanor baking a peach pie on a hot August day, the children begging for slices before it had cooled. Another told of fixing the squeaky screen door, a task Richard had put off for weeks. The simplicity of the words struck Ethan harder than any grand revelation. "These could have been my parents," he said quietly, almost to himself. Same chores, same complaints, same dreams of just making it through. Daniel glanced at him, sensing something deeper. "Maybe that's why it matters to you. Maybe you see yourself here." Ethan closed the journal slowly. He didn't want to admit how much truth was in Daniel's words. His business, his debts, his silent fears. He carried the same burdens Richard had written about 70 years ago. Together they continued reading, piecing together the Carter family's story. Letters revealed Richard's job at a steel plant, Eleanor's longing for her sister who had moved west, the children's excitement for school plays and Christmas mornings. There was love in every line, but beneath it, Ethan noticed a shadow. Financial worries slipped between the sentences, mentions of late payments and mounting bills. The weight Richard carried grew clearer with each page. Daniel read one letter aloud, his voice low and steady. Eleanor worries I spend too much time at work, but I can't see another way. The plant cuts hours, and every dollar feels smaller. Still, I'll do whatever it takes. This house is ours, and I won't let it go. The words hit Ethan hard like a reflection staring back from decades past. His own fight to keep his business alive, to hold on to what little he had built, echoed in Richard's struggles. He whispered, "He was trying to hold everything together, just like me." Daniel closed the letter carefully. And yet, it's all still here, preserved, waiting. Maybe they wanted someone to know what they carried. Upstairs, the floorboards groaned. Marcus shifted his weight above them, restless, but he didn't call down. For the moment it was only Ethan and Daniel, bound by the words of a family they had never met, yet felt deeply connected to. Ethan placed the journal back in the box and exhaled, his chest heavy. This isn't just about clearing out a house anymore. We owe them more than that. Daniel's eyes met his, filled with quiet conviction. Then let's make sure their story isn't buried again. The basement seemed to lean into their decision, its silence no longer hostile but solemn, as if approving the promise unspoken between them. Morning light filtered weakly through the boarded windows upstairs, cutting thin lines of gold across the dust. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, a stack of letters spread before him. He hadn't slept much, his mind circling the words Richard Carter had written decades ago. Every sentence about money troubles, every confession of fear for the family's future, echoed like a voice Ethan already knew too well. Daniel shuffled through another box, his excitement tempered now by gravity. "A look at this," he said, pulling out a letter sealed in an envelope torn at the edges. He unfolded it with care, revealing a cramped, hurried script. "It's Richard, writing to Eleanor. Listen, I don't know how much longer I can keep the plant work steady. Hours are cut again. I feel like the walls are closing in on me, but I'll find a way. I have to. For you and the kids." The words hung in the stale air. Ethan stared at them, his chest heavy. "It's the same fight over and over," he muttered. "Trying to hold a roof over your family's head when the world won't stop pressing down." Daniel nodded, folding the fragile paper. "This isn't just about the past. It's a mirror." He left this so someone would understand what he carried. From the living room, Marcus groaned loudly, propping his injured ankle on a stool. His voice carried sharpness, impatience. "You two sound like you're writing a history book down there. Don't forget why we're here. We're supposed to clear this place, not drown in other people's problems." Ethan looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. "You think this is just junk? These are lives, Marcus, a family's whole story left behind." Marcus met his stare, unflinching. "And what good does it do you? Reading their misery doesn't fix yours. You've got debts, Ethan, a business that's bleeding out. You think digging through these boxes is going to save you?" The words stung because they were true. Ethan's fists clenched against the table, his heart hammering with shame and anger. He forced himself to answer calmly, though his voice cracked. "Maybe it doesn't fix me, but it means something. Richard Carter wasn't just a man in a photograph. He was like us, trying, failing, fighting. His words deserve better than dust." Daniel leaned in, siding with Ethan. "If we just throw all this out, it's like they never existed. Isn't that worse than any mold or rot?" Marcus sighed heavily, shaking his head. "You two are chasing ghosts. All I see is a crumbling house that should have been leveled years ago." Ethan stood, the chair legs scraping harshly against the floor. His voice rose, stronger than before. "No, this place is more than that. And if you can't see it, fine, but I won't pretend this family doesn't matter." The silence that followed was sharp, dividing the room. Marcus turned his gaze away, jaw tight, unwilling to push further, but unwilling to agree. Daniel looked at Ethan with quiet respect, sensing the shift in his friend's resolve. Ethan lowered his eyes back to the letters, his hands trembling slightly. For so long he had carried his own burdens in silence, convincing himself no one could understand. But now, holding Richard's words, he felt less alone. The struggles of 70 years ago weren't so different from his own. The turning point wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet recognition, a choice forming inside Ethan. He no longer saw the job as just money. The Carter house wasn't only a ruin, it was a legacy, and he had stepped into it. Whether Marcus approved or not, Ethan knew he couldn't walk away from that responsibility. Upstairs, a draft rattled the loose boards on the window. The sound seemed to underline the weight of his decision. Ethan lifted another letter, eyes burning with fatigue yet sharpened by conviction. Whatever lay ahead in this house, he would face it, not as a contractor chasing a paycheck, but as a man determined to honor a story that echoed his own. The tension between the three men deepened with every passing hour. The house felt smaller now, its walls pressing closer, its silence sharper. Ethan sorted through journals at the kitchen table. Daniel catalogued photographs with almost sacred care, and Marcus sat apart, his injured ankle propped up, arms crossed like a barricade. Finally, Marcus broke the silence, his voice heavy with frustration. "This is pointless. We're not archivists, we're not historians, we're cleaners. We were paid to clear out this mess, not to play detectives in someone else's tragedy." Daniel snapped his head up, his eyes flashing. "You don't get it, Marcus. These aren't just scraps of paper. These are their voices. If we don't preserve them, who will?" Marcus's reply came fast, sharp. "And if you keep wasting time, we'll lose this job. The owner doesn't care about voices or history. He wants the place empty, period." Ethan's stomach knotted as the two glared at each other. He rubbed his temples, but Daniel's words stirred something inside him he couldn't ignore. "Marcus," he said slowly, "you're right about the owner. But he's wrong about this house. If we throw it all away, we're erasing people who lived, fought, and suffered here." "That doesn't sit right with me." Marcus leaned forward, his tone biting. "And what about you, Ethan? You've got bills piling up, debt collectors breathing down your neck. You think saving old letters will fix that? Or are you just hiding behind this family because you see yourself in them?" The accusation cut deep. Ethan's jaw clenched, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Daniel stepped in, his voice steady but fierce. "It's not hiding, it's recognizing. Ethan's not blind, he sees the struggle. That's why this matters to him, to us. We can't just rip the past apart like it's garbage." Marcus let out a harsh laugh. "Us? Don't drag me into your fantasies. I came here to work, not to worship dust." The words echoed in the quiet, heavy and cruel. Ethan pushed back from the table, standing tall despite the ache in his chest. His voice rose, steady with anger. "Maybe you came here for money, Marcus, but I'm starting to think this job is more than that. And if you can't see it, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all." Marcus's face tightened, his jaw flexing as though he might strike back with more than words. But instead he shook his head, bitter and weary. "You're losing yourself in this, both of you. It's dangerous." Ethan stared at him, the friendship between them straining under the weight of unspoken truths. Marcus had always been the cautious one, the realist who kept Ethan grounded. But now his voice sounded like a chain holding Ethan back from something he couldn't ignore. Daniel's voice softened, a plea hidden in his words. "Marcus, don't you feel it? This house isn't just rotting wood. It's telling us something. Richard Carter fought to keep his family together, just like Ethan fights to keep his business alive. If we walk away now, it's like admitting none of it matters." For the first time, Marcus's face flickered with uncertainty, but he quickly masked it. "You're chasing meaning where there isn't any. Houses full, families move on, that's life." Ethan slammed a journal closed, the sound startling in the silence. His voice was low, but his resolve was clear. "Not this time. Not this family. If we leave this house stripped bare, we're no better than the people who let it rot for 70 years. The room grew heavy again, the divide between them more dangerous than any rotten floorboard or moldy wall. Marcus turned away, silent, while Daniel exchanged a look with Ethan, an unspoken vow that they wouldn't abandon the Carters. The house seemed to hold its breath with them, as though waiting to see which path they would choose. The silence after the argument lingered heavy, broken only by the creaks of the old house settling around them. Ethan busied himself with another stack of boxes, trying to cool the fire still burning in his chest. Daniel sifted through fragile envelopes with quiet reverence, his fingers steady, his eyes bright with purpose. Marcus sat apart, his arms crossed, jaw tight, unwilling to join but unwilling to leave either. Ethan dragged a large wooden trunk away from the wall, its iron hinges rusted, its lid swollen with age. He crouched and ran his hand over the surface. "Help me with this," he said to Daniel. Marcus muttered, "More junk," but his eyes betrayed curiosity as he leaned closer despite himself. Together, Ethan and Daniel pried open the lid. The hinges groaned, releasing a burst of stale air. Inside lay carefully wrapped bundles, cloth faded and frayed, but still protective. Ethan pulled one free, unwrapping layer after layer until his hand revealed a small box. He opened it and froze. Inside gleamed a set of military medals, their ribbons faded but the metal still shining faintly beneath the dust. Bronze stars, campaign ribbons, symbols of service. Ethan's throat tightened. "These aren't just keepsakes. Someone earned these," he whispered. Daniel's eyes widened as he lifted another bundle. Inside were letters, sealed and unopened, the handwriting formal and precise. "These are from the War Department," he said softly, recognizing the style. His voice trembled with awe. "They must have come during World War II. Marcus shifted uneasily. "So what? Old medals, old letters. People served, people died. Doesn't change anything." Daniel shook his head, his voice rising with quiet intensity. "It changes everything. This family sacrificed. These medals mean someone in this house fought, maybe never came home, and the fact they were hidden here, wrapped like treasure, that means it mattered." Ethan pulled out another cloth bundle. This time inside lay a pocket watch, its silver casing tarnished but engraved with initials, R.C. He ran his thumb across the letters, his heart pounding. Richard Carter. The connection hit him like a wave. This wasn't just history anymore. It was personal. He swallowed hard. This was his, Richard Carter's. Marcus leaned in despite himself, his skepticism faltering. "And what does that prove? That he wanted to keep his things safe?" Daniel countered sharply. "No, Marcus, it proves he wanted them remembered. He wanted someone to know he lived, that his service, his struggle weren't forgotten." Ethan held the watch in his palm, feeling its weight. The room seemed to quiet around him, the old house watching as though it had been waiting for this exact moment. For years, Ethan had carried the fear that his own efforts, his long hours, his debts, his fight to keep his business alive, would amount to nothing, that he'd fade without a trace. But in this object, in these medals and letters, he felt Richard Carter reaching across time, saying, "You matter. What you carry matters." He looked at his friends, his voice rough but steady. "This isn't junk. This is legacy, and we can't just throw it in a dumpster." Marcus rubbed his temples, caught between irritation and reluctant respect. His practical side screamed that this was all meaningless in the face of bills and survival, but another part of him, buried deep, recognized the gravity of what Ethan held. Daniel's face was lit with conviction. "We were meant to find this, not by chance. We opened the door because it had to be opened," Marcus muttered. "You two sound crazy," but the edge in his voice had softened. He no longer sounded like a man convinced, but like one trying to resist being pulled into something greater than himself. Ethan closed his fingers around the pocket watch, the cool metal warming in his grip. He didn't know yet what they would do with these discoveries, but he knew one thing for certain. The Carters had trusted the house to keep their story safe. Now it was in his hands, and he couldn't let it slip away. The pocket watch sat in Ethan's hand long after the trunk had been emptied. Its weight felt far heavier than metal. Every scratch on its surface, every curve of the engraved initials, tied him closer to Richard Carter, a man he had never met yet, whose voice now echoed through journals and letters as if carried by blood. Daniel crouched beside him, his eyes bright despite the fatigue lining his face. "Do you feel it too?" he asked. "The connection, it's not just history." "It's a reminder." Ethan nodded slowly, his throat tightening. "I've spent months wondering if everything I've built, my business, my work, means anything. Debt's eating me alive. Some days I wake up and wonder if it'd matter to anyone if I quit. But this..." He lifted the watch slightly. Richard Carter fought through the same kind of battles. And even after 70 years, his struggle is still here, still speaking. That means something. For once, Marcus didn't scoff. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, but his expression softened. His ankle throbbed, and his pride was bruised from their arguments. But deep down, he saw something in Ethan's face he hadn't seen before. Clarity. "So what?" Marcus muttered, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "You're saying a dead man's watch gives you hope?" Ethan met his gaze. "I'm saying it proves we matter, Marcus. What we carry, what we fight for, it doesn't disappear, even if it feels like it." Marcus looked away, unsettled by the conviction in his friend's tone. He'd always been the realist, the one reminding Ethan of the risks, the costs, the dangers. But now, watching Ethan find strength in the remnants of a stranger's life, Marcus wondered if maybe his own way of seeing the world was too narrow. Daniel, meanwhile, was lost in the photographs he'd carefully spread across the workbench. His fingers lingered on an image of the Carter children standing proudly in their Sunday best. "I studied history in college," he said quietly, "but it always felt distant, like facts in a textbook. This is different. These people lived on this street. They cooked in that kitchen. They dreamed, failed, laughed, and argued just like we do. For the first time in years, I feel like what I love, history, actually matters." Ethan smiled faintly, the lines of exhaustion on his face easing. "Because it does matter. You're proving that right now." Daniel's voice grew steadier, almost certain. "Maybe this is what I was meant to do, not just study history, but bring it back to life. Tell the stories that would have been lost. The Carters and families like them, they deserve more than silence." For a long moment the three men sat in that basement, the air still thick with dust, but their hearts lighter than they had been in days. The house no longer felt like an enemy pressing down on them. It felt like a bridge, connecting their own doubts and fears to the resilience of those who had come before. Marcus finally broke the silence, his tone softer than they expected. "Maybe I've been too harsh. I thought this was all nonsense, just junk, just a job. But maybe you're right. Maybe there's more here than I wanted to admit." Daniel's head lifted quickly, surprise flashing across his face. "You mean that?" Marcus gave a reluctant nod. "I still think we're in over our heads. But I can see why it matters to you, and to him." He gestured toward Ethan. "If this helps you keep going, maybe it's worth more than I thought." Ethan looked between them, a faint smile breaking through his weariness. For years he had carried his battles alone, ashamed of his struggles. But here in the basement of a forgotten house, with a watch in his hand and his friends beside him, he felt a new strength settle inside. The Carters had not been erased, and neither would he. The next morning arrived grey and heavy, clouds hanging low over Maple Street. Inside the house the mood shifted. The discoveries of the night before still echoed in their minds, but now another voice demanded attention, the voice of reality. The property manager arrived unexpectedly, a tall man in a pressed suit, far too neat for the decaying house he entered. He frowned at the dust, the boxes stacked carefully instead of discarded. "You haven't made much progress," he said flatly. The owner was clear. "This place needs to be emptied. No exceptions." Ethan straightened, his heart sinking. "We're working through it. There's more here than expected." The man's expression hardened. "More or not, it all goes. No one cares about old boxes. Finish the job, or I'll find someone else who will." The words struck like a hammer. Ethan's throat went dry. He thought of the journals, the medals, the pocket watch still in his bag. The idea of tossing them into a dumpster made his stomach twist. Daniel stepped forward, his voice tight. "You can't just throw away a family's history. These are letters, photographs, records of lives lived. They matter." The manager shot him a sharp look. "What matters is the job." "The owner doesn't want a museum, he wants a cleared property. I don't pay you to get sentimental." Marcus stayed quiet, watching the tension crackle between them. Part of him agreed with the manager. The job was the job. But another part, the part softened by what they had uncovered, couldn't ignore Ethan's clenched fists or Daniel's desperate tone. When the manager left, his warning still ringing in the air, silence filled the room. Ethan dropped heavily into a chair, his hands running through his hair. He doesn't care. None of them do. To him, this is just junk. Daniel slammed a box closed, anger flashing across his face. Then we can't let him win. We've seen too much to pretend it doesn't matter. We have a choice. Either follow orders and destroy this family's legacy or protect it. Marcus let out a long sigh, rubbing his injured ankle. And how exactly do you plan to protect it, Daniel? You think the Historical Society is going to swoop in and save us? They don't even know this place exists. Daniel looked at Ethan, his eyes burning with conviction. Then we tell them. We donate what we can. We preserve what we find. We give the Carters their voice back. Ethan stared at the floor, torn. On one side was money, the chance to finally get ahead if he finished the job without trouble. On the other was the Carters, their story resting in his hands, their voices whispering through time. He thought of Richard's journals, the letters describing the same financial struggles Ethan carried now. Could he betray that story just for a paycheck? Marcus's voice cut in, gentler now. Ethan, think about yourself for once. You've been drowning for months. If you blow this job, where does that leave you? Ethan looked up sharply. And what if I do the job and lose myself in the process? What's left then? Marcus flinched at the words. For the first time he saw how deeply the house had changed Ethan. His friend wasn't just clinging to scraps of history, he was clinging to hope, to proof that his own struggle meant something. Daniel placed a hand on the stack of journals, his voice steady. This is bigger than us, bigger than money. The Carters fought to be remembered. If we don't protect that, then what are we? The room fell silent again. Outside, the wind rattled the boarded windows, as if urging them toward a decision. Ethan felt the weight pressing harder than ever, the line between survival and integrity blurring in the dust-filled air. The choice was no longer about cleaning a house, it was about choosing who they wanted to be. The decision weighed heavily on them, but the longer they lingered in the Carter house, the clearer it became. Ethan stood in the center of the living room, staring at the piles of letters, journals, medals, and photographs they had carefully set aside. The dust no longer looked like decay to him, it looked like a veil waiting to be lifted. We can't throw this away, he said finally, his voice steady. Not after everything we've found. The Carters deserve better. Daniel exhaled with relief, a faint smile breaking across his tired face. I knew you'd see it. This isn't about money anymore. It's about honor. Marcus rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. He looked at Ethan, then at the stacks of history surrounding them. For a long time he said nothing. Finally he sighed. I still think we're in over our heads, but maybe I was wrong to call it junk. If it matters this much to you both, then fine. We protect it. Ethan turned to him, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Thank you. I know this isn't easy for you. Marcus shrugged, his tone softer than before. You're my friend, Ethan. I don't have to agree with everything you do to stand beside you. Together, they began sorting through the most important items. The journals with Richard Carter's steady handwriting, the letters sealed in neat bundles, the family photographs, the medals that told of sacrifice and silence. Daniel carefully catalogued each piece, writing notes in his small notebook. The local historical society will take these, he said, conviction in his voice. They'll preserve them. We'll make sure the Carters aren't forgotten. Marcus chuckled dryly. Never thought I'd see the day I'd be hauling boxes to a museum instead of a dumpster. Ethan smiled faintly. Better ending than they'd ever get in the trash. As they worked, Ethan felt a strange calm settle inside him. For months he had been consumed by fear. Fear of losing his business, fear of failing the people who believed in him. But here, standing among the traces of a family long gone, he realized integrity mattered more than profit. Richard Carter hadn't given up even when the walls closed in around him, and neither would Ethan. When they finally loaded the first boxes into the truck, the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. The golden light touched the peeling paint of the house, softening its edges. Daniel paused, glancing back at the windows. Feels like it's watching us leave, he said quietly. Ethan followed his gaze. For the first time, the house didn't feel hostile or suffocating. It felt lighter. "Maybe it's thanking us," he said. Marcus shook his head, smirking. "You two are turning poetic now. What's next? Writing a book?" Daniel's eyes lit with a spark of possibility. "Maybe I will. Not just about this house, but about others like it. Forgotten places with stories waiting to be told." Ethan clapped him on the shoulder. "Then do it. You've got the passion for it." They returned inside for one final sweep. The room still smelled of mold, the floorboards still creaked dangerously, and the wallpaper still curled away from the walls. But something had changed. Where once they saw ruin, now they saw echoes of resilience. The Carters had left more than dust. They had left proof that even ordinary lives carried extraordinary meaning. When they stepped back outside, the air felt fresher, the street quieter. Ethan turned, looking one last time at the house on Maple Street. He whispered to himself, "You won't be forgotten." Daniel heard him and nodded. "No, not anymore." Marcus leaned against the truck, shaking his head but smiling faintly. "Guess we did more than just clean a house." Ethan climbed into the driver's seat, the pocket watch in his jacket pressing against his chest like a heartbeat. For the first time in months, he felt a strange certainty. He wasn't finished. Not with his business. Not with himself. The Carters had given him something he hadn't realized he'd lost: hope. The truck rumbled softly as they drove away from Maple Street. None of the men spoke at first. The boxes in the back held more than just old paper and rusted metal. They carried voices, memories, and struggles that had once been sealed away. The silence in the cab wasn't empty. It was full, heavy with reflection. Marcus finally broke it, his voice quieter than usual. "You know, I didn't think any of this mattered. I thought it was just another job, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe what we did back there meant something after all." Ethan glanced at him, surprised by the honesty. "It did. You may not see it all now, but someday, when people read Richard's words or see those photographs, they'll know the Carters lived. They'll know they mattered." Daniel leaned forward from the back seat, his eyes glowing with determination. "And we made that possible. Without us, all of it would have been lost forever. That's bigger than a paycheck, it's history." Marcus gave a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Guess you were right, Daniel. Not everything is junk." Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, the pocket watch pressing against his chest through his jacket. He hadn't let go of it since the day before. It wasn't just a relic anymore. It was a reminder. Richard Carter had faced hardships, carried burdens, and left behind proof of his fight. Ethan had his own battles, but now he felt less alone in them. When they reached the local historical society later that day, the reception was warmer than they expected. The curator, an older woman with sharp eyes, examined the boxes with reverence. "You've brought us a treasure," she said softly. "Not gold or jewels, but something far rarer, the story of a family that might have been forgotten." Daniel's chest swelled with pride. "They deserve to be remembered," the curator nodded, "and thanks to you they will be." As they left the building, the sun broke free from the clouds, casting long golden rays over the town. Ethan paused outside, taking a deep breath. For the first time in months, the weight on his shoulders didn't feel suffocating. It was still there, his debts, his uncertain future, but he had found something stronger than fear. He had found purpose. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "So, what now? You going back to your business, or are you planning on becoming a full-time historian with Daniel?" Ethan laughed softly, the sound surprising even himself. "I'm going back to work, but not the same way. No shortcuts, no compromises. Integrity first. If Richard Carter could keep fighting when everything pressed against him, then so can I." Daniel smiled, his eyes distant with thought. "And I'll start writing. Not just about the Carters, but about stories like theirs. People need to know the past isn't just dates and events, it's voices like these." Marcus shook his head with a faint smile. "Guess we all came out different, huh? Never thought clearing a house would change us." Ethan looked back down the street toward where the Carter house stood hidden behind trees and ivy. It no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a monument. Silent, yes, but no longer forgotten. Sometimes the past teaches us what the present can't, he said softly. Daniel nodded. And sometimes it reminds us of who we need to be. The three men stood together in the golden light, the air crisp and full of quiet promise. They had entered the Carter house as workers with a job. They left as men carrying a legacy. And so their journey ended, not with riches or fame, but with something far more valuable. The knowledge that even in silence, stories endure, and that in remembering them, we find strength for our own battles. If you've followed this story until the end, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more journeys like this, stories that remind us of the resilience, hope, and humanity that live within forgotten walls. And if you want to keep exploring, click on the video suggested on your screen right now. Another powerful tale is waiting for you there.